My name is Carter Hale. I'm 32. And on Thanksgiving, my family called me a failed soldier while my uncle smirked over gravy. Then the doorbell cut through the laughter. Cold air spilled in. Colonel Evelyn Parker stepped over the threshold in full service uniform, saluted, and said, "Sergeant Hale, correction, Mr. Hale. We need you to lead a high-priority security program. Decision by Monday." Forks froze midair. My father's smile slipped. My brother's toast died in his throat. I kept my face calm and my hands steady on the chair back. But what they didn't know was, I'd brought a different kind of firepower. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. I know I'm not the only one who sat at a table full of relatives and felt the knives were sharper than the silverware. Stick with me because this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about taking it back. I didn't always know my place in the Hale family was conditional. When you're a kid, you just assume love is spread evenly, like mashed potatoes across a plate. But it didn't take me long to learn that in our house. Some servings were piled high, while others were just scraps. I was 12 the first time I noticed the difference. Mason had just turned 14, and Dad bought him a brand new mountain bike with thick tires and shiny handlebars. The thing gleamed under the porch light like a trophy. At the same time, I was handed a second-hand backpack so you don't look sloppy at school. I remember running my hands over the worn zippers. The faint smell of somebody else's cologne clinging to the fabric. Be grateful, Mom said. Not everything has to be new. That phrase, be grateful, became the refrain of my teenage years. At dinner, Dad always sat at the head of the table. Mason to his right like a prince in training. Brooke and I filled the other chairs. But it was clear who mattered most. Mason's plate was always loaded first. Steak, potatoes, the last dinner roll. I'd get whatever was left. And Mom would smile like it was some noble lesson in humility. You're tougher, she'd say. You can handle it. I thought it was just small things at first. But small things, repeated year after year, carved trenches deeper than you realize. When I was 17, I won a medal at a JROTC competition. We had trained for months, marching drills until our boots wore thin. That night, when I stood on stage with the ribbon around my neck, I scanned the crowd, searching for my family. I spotted them in the bleachers only to watch them stand up and leave halfway through the ceremony. Mason had a playoff basketball game across town, and we can't miss that. I swallowed the disappointment, told myself the medal would speak louder than their absence. But alone in the car ride home, staring at the ribbon, it didn't feel like enough. I didn't know it then. But that empty row of seats would matter later. College wasn't in the cards for me. Not with the way money was tight. Mason's tuition was somehow always worth the investment, while mine was treated like an extravagance. So I enlisted. Infantry first, then later transitioned to intel liaison. I wanted discipline, a paycheck, and maybe a reason to make Dad proud. During deployments, I wired money home. Not once, not twice, dozens of times. I kept the receipts. Thousands of dollars that should have gone to my own savings were funneled into mortgage payments, late bills, emergencies that always seemed to crop up when Dad called or Mom left a voicemail with a cracked voice. We're counting on you, Carter. And each time I did it, I told myself, this will prove my worth. They'll see I'm dependable. But if they ever did, they never said. No thank you cards. No acknowledgement at Christmas. Just a quiet expectation that I'd keep doing it. One night, halfway around the world, I was crouched in a sandbagged outpost when the satellite phone rang. Richard's voice cut through the static, sharp with urgency. If we don't get $5,000 by Friday, the bank's taking the house. His voice cracked then, something I wasn't used to hearing. I sent the money the next morning without hesitation. My squad joked about me being the family ATM, and I laughed with them. But inside, it hurt. I didn't know it back then, But that voicemail would come back years later, like a loaded weapon. When I finally rotated out and returned home, I thought things would change. I'd proved myself. Hadn't I? But instead of respect, I got mockery. Uncle Randy was the worst. He never wore a uniform a day in his life. But he'd lean back at Thanksgiving, swirling his beer, and say things like, "Guess they kicked you out for being too soft." Huh. Everyone would laugh, everyone but me. Even Brooke, my sister, tried to soften the blows with humor. "Don't mind him," she'd whisper, passing me the mashed potatoes. But she never stood up for me. Not really. Silence can wound as much as words. After I left active duty, I started consulting, cybersecurity, crisis response, training employees how to react when alarms blared or systems went down. It paid well. It gave me purpose. But to my family, sitting behind a computer wasn't real work. Dad once said it outright. "Your brother closes deals, brings in money. You just teach PowerPoints." That one stung more than I let on. I kept my apartment modest. A corner unit overlooking the city skyline. Nothing flashy. My office wall was lined with whiteboards, sticky notes, schedules, the kind of order that kept me sane. Jordan, an old buddy from my unit, sometimes stopped by for beers. "Man," he said once, looking around, "you've built something solid here." I nodded. But deep down, the praise I wanted wasn't his. Every holiday, the same routine replayed. I'd show up, sit at the long dining table, and absorb the digs. "If you hadn't quit, remember when Mason carried the team to regionals?" My accomplishments were invisible, swallowed by the legend of my brother. And yet, I stayed quiet. Year after year, I thought if I kept my head down, if I endured long enough, things would shift. That maybe one day Dad would look across the table and say, "I'm proud of you, son." But that day never came. I didn't know it back then. But every unspoken word, every stolen credit, every half-empty plate, they were bricks stacking into a wall. And eventually, that wall would turn into my strongest weapon. Some memories don't fade. They cling like smoke in old curtains, showing up when you least expect them. I remember one Thanksgiving during my second deployment. I had wired home nearly half my combat pay to keep the mortgage current. That night, I called during dinner break. The line crackled, voices muffled, but I could hear laughter in the background. Mason was bragging about a new watch. Dad was clinking a glass. When I asked how the house was, Mom said, "We're fine now, thanks to Mason stepping up." I almost dropped the phone. Mason hadn't sent a dime, but in their version of events, he was the hero. I swallowed the correction. Let it go. Stay focused. But the bitterness settled deep in my chest. There was another night, years later, when the water heater broke in the middle of winter. I was back stateside by then, living in a cramped apartment, saving for my own place. Dad called me at midnight. "You've got a steady check. Don't you lend us $2,000. We'll pay you back." Of course, they never did. The next month, Mason posted photos of himself in Vegas, bottle service and neon lights flashing behind him. I saw the receipts with my own eyes, but no one else wanted to see. Even Brooke, who sometimes tried to comfort me, played her part in the silent hierarchy. When Mason wrecked Dad's truck one summer night after a party, it was me they called at 2 a.m. "Carter, bring your tools. Fix the camera in the garage before the insurance guy sees it." I did it, wiping oil off my hands in the freezing dark, while Mason slept it off inside. At breakfast, Dad patted Mason's shoulder and said, "Takes a man to own up to his mistakes." I stared at the pancakes, the smell of burnt butter rising, and clenched my jaw until it hurt. I didn't know it back then, but those hidden favors would one day become exhibits in my case file. Christmas was no different. The year Mason got a trip to Hawaii as a gift. I got socks. Thick, itchy wool socks wrapped in cheap paper. "You're practical," Mom said with a smile. I laughed bitterly under my breath, pretending it didn't sting. But when I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, I realized I wasn't just being overlooked. I was being written out. Still, I kept sending money. I kept showing up. I kept waiting for the day when someone would say out loud what I had done. That patience nearly broke me. One summer storm, when rain hammered the roof and the gutters overflowed. Grandma Eileen had a doctor's appointment. No one else wanted to take her. I drove her across town, paid the $600 copay myself when her insurance card bounced. She never looked at me. Not really. Just muttered, "Mason's such a good boy. Always checking in." My fingers tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white, as if holding it tighter could keep the rage from spilling out. But even then, I said nothing. I told myself silence was strength. Years later, after I'd left the service and started consulting, I thought maybe my distance would change things. But family has a way of pulling you back into the old roles. Every group chat was a minefield of jokes. Failed soldier, desk jockey, memes about unemployment checks. I archived them all quietly. Screenshots saved, dates marked. Each insult became a file in a growing archive I didn't even realize I was building. The apartment I rented then became my bunker. The smell of stale coffee hung in the air. Notes and spreadsheets littered my desk. Jordan, my old unit buddy, sometimes dropped by before dawn to drag me on a run. I hated it at first, my lungs burning in the cold. But with each mile, the weight of the Hale house loosened just a little. What I didn't know then was how important those miles would be. They rebuilt something inside me that the dining table had eroded. The county recorder's office is another memory that sticks. Beige walls, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, the dusty smell of paper stacked high. Clerk Danvers leaned across the counter, lowered his voice, and tapped a folder. "You might want to look at this. The trust your folks filed, it's incomplete. Your name's still on the deed from that refinance years back." My pulse thudded in my ears. For a moment, all the dinners, all the insults, all the silences lined up like dominoes. And now I finally had a hand to tip them. But before that discovery, there were years of smaller wounds. I'd show up at family dinners, and Dad would raise a toast to Mason's success, barely acknowledging I was in the room. Uncle Randy would clap Mason on the back, calling him the real man of the family. Brooke would keep her head down, chewing, pretending not to notice me stiffen in my chair. Every time I thought about walking away completely, something pulled me back. Maybe guilt, maybe hope, maybe just the need to prove I wasn't the outsider they painted me as. It all stacked up into one undeniable truth: I had given everything. Money, time, silence, loyalty, and they had taken it all as their due. Looking back now, I can see the pattern as clear as daylight. Each flashback, each sting, each betrayal wasn't isolated. It was groundwork. It was the slow construction of the man who would one day walk into that backyard barbecue with a binder under his arm. I didn't know it at the time, but all those nights swallowing my words, all those years of being erased, were shaping me into someone they'd never be able to dismiss again. Thanksgiving wasn't the end of it. It was only the opening shot. In the days that followed, the group chat lit up like a firing range. Mason dropped memes of cartoon soldiers tripping over their boots. Uncle Randy replied with gifs of clowns saluting. Brooke sent nothing silence, which in our family meant consent. I didn't respond. I screenshotted every single one. Date, time, sender, folder marked evidence. Then Mom called. Her voice was soft, syrupy, the same tone she used when I was a kid, and she wanted me to hand over my allowance for groceries. "Carter, honey, I know Thanksgiving got heated. Don't hold it against your brother. He's under a lot of pressure. We just want peace in this family. I let the silence stretch until she shifted. And about what your father announced, don't make a scene. The trust is for the best. Mason can handle the responsibility. You've got your career, your apartment. Let him carry this. My throat tightened. She framed it like a kindness, as if being erased was a gift. Thanks for the advice, I said flatly, and hung up. A few nights later, Mason called a family update meeting. Not at the house this time, on Zoom. His background blurred, but I could see blueprints taped to the wall behind him. He was practically glowing. So here's the plan, he said, waving a printout. Guest house goes up by summer. We'll refinance, lock in the rate, and finally modernize the place. Dad says it'll raise property value big time. Uncle Randy chimed in from his square. Finally, some leadership in this family. I leaned closer to the screen. You realize you can't refinance without every owner signing off, right? The silence was sharp. Dad cleared his throat. Carter, don't complicate this. Mason's handling it. I didn't argue. Just said, check page 3 of the deed, and logged off. That one line was enough to plant the first seed of doubt. The following weekend, Lily, our cousin, sent me a late-night text. You should see this. Attached was a video clip. Uncle Randy at a barbecue, beer in hand, telling a loud story about Carter's unit screwing up overseas. He mimed ducking from imaginary gunfire. People laughing in the background. His voice sneered. Guy came back with nothing but a broken ego. Lily's caption, recorded this last month. Thought you should know. I watched it 3 times. My chest burned. Not with shame, but with a strange kind of clarity. They weren't just mocking me in private. They were performing my failure for an audience. I added the file to my archive. Another skirmish came at Sunday dinner. I showed up out of obligation. Sat through the usual chatter. When I mentioned a new corporate client I'd landed, Dad waved his fork dismissively. That's not real work. Mason closed deals. He brings in numbers. Mason smirked, leaning back. Don't be salty, little bro. Some of us were built for pressure. Some of us quit. The word landed like a gavel. Quit. I could feel heat crawl up my neck. But I didn't bite. Instead, I looked around the table, memorizing the smirks, the nods, the way even Brooke smothered a laugh behind her napkin. Inside, a switch clicked. The escalation wasn't only in words. Paper trails started surfacing. Jordan helped me track financial filings, old mortgage records. That's when I uncovered the voicemail from years ago. Dad's voice. Raw. Begging Carter. If you don't wire money by Friday, the bank takes the house. The date matched exactly with my overseas transfer. I remembered how I skipped hot meals that week, living off powdered coffee, just to cover it. And now that sacrifice was erased, painted over with Mason's smile. I didn't rage. I logged the file, added it to the binder. Each insult, each dismissal, each cover-up was another page, another bullet chambered. The following week, Mom invited me over under the guise of family bonding. When I arrived, she slipped me a folded piece of paper, her handwriting faint in pencil across the margin of a trust draft. This can change. Her eyes glistened like she was offering mercy. Don't fight, Carter. Just keep quiet and things will work out in your favor. I turned the paper over in my hand, then slid it back across the counter. So I only matter if I behave. Her face pinched. Why do you always twist things? We're trying to protect you from yourself? That phrase stuck like a splinter. Protect me from myself. 2 nights later, the winery called me. Not for Mason. Not for Dad. For me. Mr. Hale, this is Camille Ortega, event coordinator at Stonebridge. We've been trying to reach your family regarding an unpaid balance. I blinked. Unpaid. They said it was settled. Her tone sharpened. It wasn't. The card was declined the day before processing. Funds were withdrawn from the account hours earlier. My stomach turned. Withdrawn by who I can't disclose names. But check the timestamp on the invoice from Power Sports dealership. Same day. Same hour. She hesitated. You didn't hear it from me. After the call, I sat in my car outside the gym, engine idling, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. A new picture was forming Mason pulling cash for his shiny new UTV while pretending the winery had bank issues. Cover-up number 1. The next Sunday, I drove by the Hale garage. Jordan in the passenger seat. Phone, camera ready. Through the half-open door sat the UTV. Sticker from the dealership still clinging to the frame. Jordan snapped photos. Zooming in on the timestamp of delivery. Evidence. Neat and irrefutable. At the following family dinner, Dad pressed his palms together like a CEO running a board meeting. We need Carter to contribute again. Short-term loan. Just to smooth over some bumps. Mason leaned back smugly. Come on, little bro. Don't make this about you. I kept my voice even. I already paid. Years ago. Remember the mortgage wire? Dad's eyes flashed. That was different. No. I said quietly. That was the same. Exactly the same. The room chilled. For once. Even Uncle Randy had no comeback. But the escalation didn't stop. A few days later, Brooke texted me a screenshot from the family chat, a meme of a soldier crawling in the mud. Captioned, Carter trying to stay relevant. The comments underneath were laughing emojis from cousins. Even Dad. I stared at the screen until my chest went tight. Brooke added a side message. I don't agree with them, but you know how it is. Yeah. I knew exactly how it was. Then came the barbecue announcement. Mason bragged across the group chat about breaking ground on the guest house. Complete with renderings. The entire family thread erupted with claps and heart emojis. I typed nothing. Just watched. The night before the barbecue, I sat at my desk. Binder open. Evidence stacked. The deed showing my name. The voicemail of Dad begging for money. Camille's email confirming the decline wasn't the bank's fault. Photos of the UTV in the garage. Sticker intact. Lily's clip of Uncle Randy performing my failure for laughs. Piece by piece. The arsenal was ready. I closed the binder. Ran a hand over the cover. And whispered to myself. Tomorrow. They'll see it. I didn't know it then. But that barbecue, the moment they thought would crown Mason as the rightful heir, was going to be the day the Hale family finally learned the cost of underestimating me. The afternoon sun sat heavy over Stonebridge Winery's back lawn. The air thick with the smell of grilled meat and spilled beer. Long folding tables stretched across the grass, covered in platters of ribs, bowls of potato salad, and mason jars of sweet tea sweating in the heat. During deployments, I wired money home. Not once. Not twice, dozens of times. I kept the receipts. Thousands of dollars that should have gone to my own savings were funneled into mortgage payments. Late bills. Emergencies that always seemed to crop up when Dad called or Mom left a voicemail with a cracked voice. We're counting on you, Carter. And each time I did it, I told myself, this will prove my worth. They'll see I'm dependable. But if they ever did, they never said. No thank you cards. Mom fussed with the tablecloth, smiling too brightly. Uncle Randy held a beer, already red-faced from the sun and alcohol, grinning like the MC of a roast. I arrived deliberately early. Binder tucked under my arm. Crisp shirt pressed. Boots polished. No uniform. No theatrics. Just presence. Heads turned as I crossed the yard. I nodded politely. Set the binder on the table next to the blueprints. And poured myself a glass of water. Didn't think you'd show? Mason smirked. Voice loud enough for everyone. Of course I'd show. I said evenly. Wouldn't miss the family celebration. As more people gathered, Dad cleared his throat, raising his glass. To new beginnings. To Mason, who's stepping up as trustee and carrying the Hale name forward. This guest house is just the first step. Glasses lifted. A cheer went up. And that was my cue. I placed my glass down carefully, flipped open the binder, and spoke into the sudden hush. Before anyone gets too comfortable, we should look at the deed. The word deed cracked through the chatter like a whip. Eyes swung toward me. Mason laughed nervously. Carter. Not the time. Man. I didn't smile. I slid the notarized document across the table toward Dad. Page 3. My name. Still there. Dad frowned. Scanning. His jaw tightened. Mom's hand hovered near his arm, as if to stop him from reading further. It's a technicality, she said quickly, her voice too sweet. No, I said calmly. It's binding. Every renovation, every refinancing, every shovel in the dirt requires my signature. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Mason's face flushed. You're bluffing. Am I? I tilted my head toward the document. Check the county seal. Uncle Randy barked a laugh, trying to break the tension. Listen to this guy, failed soldier turned lawyer. But before the laughter could catch on, Lily's voice cut sharp. Funny. Uncle. Want to explain this clip? She tapped her phone. And suddenly, Randy's own voice blasted from a speaker, him mocking my service, exaggerating some drunken story about me washing out. His laugh on the recording was ugly. Mean. The yard went silent. People shifted uncomfortably, eyes sliding away from him. Randy's face drained of color. I let the silence hang. Then I spoke again, low and steady. While you were laughing, I was wiring money from deployments. Here I flipped to the receipts. 8 transfers. Thousands each. Straight into this house. And here I pressed a button on my phone. And Dad's old voicemail played. His voice desperate, begging me to cover the mortgage. The sound of his own words in front of everyone was heavier than any accusation I could have made. Dad's face turned stone. Mom's lips parted like she might cry. But no sound came out. Mason's smirk collapsed. I closed the binder with a deliberate thud. So here's how it works. Either we redraw the trust, with me as co-trustee, equal say, or I file for partition, which means this house goes up for sale. Market value. No guest house. No legacy. The words hung in the air, final and cold. No one spoke. A fly buzzed over the potato salad, the only sound in the still yard. Mason's hand curled into a fist, then loosened when he caught Dad's look. Finally. Dad muttered. Fix this. Mason swallowed, voice strained. Fine. Co-trustee. I gave a single nod, tucked the binder back under my arm, and took a slow sip of water. The crowd exhaled as if released from a spell. No cheers this time. No laughter. Just silence weighted with recognition. For the first time, they weren't laughing at me. They were listening. And as I glanced around the table, locking eyes with each of them in turn, I let a cold smile curl at the corner of my mouth. The Hale family had just learned I wasn't the failed soldier. I was the one holding the line. After the barbecue, the Hale yard felt different in my memory. The same wooden deck, the same weathered siding on the house, but the laughter that used to echo there had turned brittle. They didn't toast again after my binder hit the table. They just drifted apart. Voices low, eyes avoiding me like I'd become a stranger in their own home. A week later, Mom showed up at my apartment with a plate of her cinnamon rolls, her peace offering. She stood in my doorway, smiling too brightly. Your father hasn't slept well since Sunday, she said. We weren't trying to hurt you, Carter. We thought it was best for the family. I didn't invite her in. I leaned against the frame, calm, measured. The right thing doesn't usually happen behind someone's back. I said. Her smile faltered. She set the plate down and left without another word. Dad didn't call for 2 more weeks. When he finally did, his voice was clipped. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. No. I answered quietly. I showed them the truth. You embarrassed yourselves when you tried to cut me out. He didn't reply. The silence on the line told me enough. Meanwhile, Mason tried to steamroll with texts about renovation schedules, contractor bids, financing deadlines, as if nothing had changed. Each time, I sent the same response. Send the paperwork. I'll review and sign if it makes sense. By the fourth delay, his frustration bled through. You're just doing this to make my life difficult. I waited a full day before replying no. I'm doing this to make sure no one erases me again. He didn't text back. But the real shift came at the next family dinner. No yokes. No failed soldier. No snide remarks. Uncle Randy barely looked at me, too afraid that video would resurface. Mason stayed quiet, his jaw tight. Even Dad kept his comments clipped. For the first time in my life, I wasn't their punchline. I wasn't loud. I didn't gloat. I just sat, calm and steady, eating in silence. Because silence, I realized, could be sharper than any shout. They thought they'd humiliated me on Thanksgiving. They thought they'd erased me from the family legacy. But all they'd done was hand me the one weapon they never expected: proof. Proof of my place. Proof of their lies. Proof of what they owed. And that was just the beginning. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, you know the sting doesn't fade overnight. But remember, silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the sharpest weapon you've got. My story isn't about winning a single dinner table argument. It's about drawing a line that can't be crossed again. So, tell me, have you ever been pushed to the edge by the people who should have had your back? Drop your story in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This isn't the end of my story. Not even close.